Let's imagine you're settled in with your evening routine, perhaps flipping through a magazine or just unwinding after supper, and we can have a calm, honest chat about something that creeps into life for so many of us once we cross into our 60s and 70s. Those small, nagging changes start appearing more regularly. Maybe you set your reading glasses on the table and seconds later have no idea where they went, or you're sharing a favorite family story and suddenly the exact word you want stays just out of reach. Or there are mornings when you open your eyes and everything inside your head feels wrapped in a soft blanket, slowing down your thoughts and making the day ahead seem a touch more tiring right from the start. Most folks look at these moments and think, this must be what getting older naturally does. Nothing to be done about it. But after more than 20 years of sitting with seniors, hearing their stories, and looking closely at what research says about how sleep ties into keeping the mind working well, I can share that a very large share of these experiences connect directly to the quality and patterns of sleep night after night, rather than being an unbreakable rule of age. And the heart of my professional life has been dedicated to helping people in their later decades hold on to clear thinking, steady moods, and the ability to enjoy their days without that constant sense of mental drag. In conversations with patients, the same kinds of concerns surface again and again. Someone might describe how they used to remember phone numbers or appointments effortlessly, and now they second-guess themselves constantly. Another might say small inconveniences, like a delayed delivery or a noisy neighbor, spark irritation or short temper in ways that feel unfamiliar and out of character. Or they talk about this ongoing feeling of mental dullness that turns even pleasant activities, like reading the newspaper or chatting with a friend, into something that requires extra effort. Nearly every time, the person sitting across from me has already decided this is simply the price tag that comes attached to more birthdays, an unavoidable slowing down that everyone faces. Yet when we start examining routines more carefully, a different explanation often comes into view. Frequently, the main contributor is a set of sleep habits that have eased away from what works best over the months and years, so quietly that no one connects the dots until the thinking and feeling start to suffer noticeably. The hopeful truth is that these same habits can usually be gently realigned with changes that fit into real life, cost nothing extra, and ask for no dramatic upheaval. It systematically clears away the byproducts that build up in brain tissue from all the planning, remembering, deciding, and reacting you do during waking hours, almost the way a diligent housekeeper sweeps and dusts so the rooms stay comfortable and usable. It reinforces the delicate bridges between brain cells that store and connect memories, making sure the details of yesterday, a grandchild's funny comment, the route to the doctor's office, a recipe you read, don't fade as fast or get lost in the shuffle. It quietly repairs tiny strains and wear in those neural connections, keeping electrical signals moving swiftly and accurately so your thoughts stay quick and precise. And it carefully processes the emotional tones of the day, helping sort through any tension, sadness, or excitement so you can wake with a more balanced inner state rather than carrying forward yesterday's leftover feelings. Whenever sleep becomes broken into fragments night after night, or those deeper restorative stages get consistently shortened, this vital behind-the-scenes maintenance work either gets delayed, done incompletely, or skipped in places. That shortfall shows itself first and most clearly in ordinary daily experience. Forming a complete thought takes noticeably longer. Familiar names or facts hover teasingly out of reach. Holding attention on a task or conversation requires deliberate effort, and your emotional responses might feel uneven, overly sensitive, or strangely muted, even when life itself isn't throwing major curveballs. Figures gathered by the National Institute on Aging make the picture quite plain. Nearly 1 out of every 2 adults who have passed 65 deals with sleep difficulties that continue over time. Yet more than 6 out of 10 in that group regard those difficulties as unimportant or as an ordinary expected companion of growing older. Far too often, the connection gets missed between those unsettled nights and the slow, steady wearing down of mental quickness and emotional evenness that follows across months and years. The process unfolds without any loud signals, no stabbing pain, no sudden crisis, no obvious marker, just a gradual softening of how sharply and reliably the mind operates. Having pored over study after study and listened to hundreds upon hundreds of personal accounts, one observation stands out consistently. Among all the elements that influence how well a senior's brain continues to function, the ways we handle sleep rise to the top as one of the most significant and, happily, one of the most open to positive change. The root cause rarely lies mainly in consuming too many sweets, enduring nonstop pressure, or carrying a particular set of family genes. Far more commonly, it traces back to the ordinary, repeated choices and patterns surrounding when we go to bed, how we prepare for rest, and what happens once we're there. So come along with me now as we look at this in a relaxed, step-by-step way. I'll describe the 5 sleep-related patterns that most frequently and quietly undermine brain performance for people in their later years, then explain practical countermeasures drawn directly from careful work carried out at Harvard, Stanford, the University of Colorado, Johns Hopkins, the University of Michigan, and the National Institute on Aging. These suggestions are grounded in real-world application. They aren't experimental ideas or difficult regimens, but sensible shifts that have already brought clearer thinking, calmer feelings, and stronger daily focus to many individuals just like you. Whenever you feel ready, go ahead and put your age in the comments section. It helps me picture the people I'm speaking with and recognize who might be hearing echoes of their own nights and days. Consider first the issue of bedtime that varies from one night to the next. For a great many seniors, the hour they turn in shifts noticeably, perhaps going earlier one evening because an afternoon visit left them drained, staying up later another time because a television program held their interest, and following a different rhythm altogether on days without a fixed schedule. This kind of inconsistency unsettles the body's built-in 24-hour timing system known as the circadian rhythm. That internal system organizes the best moments for peak alertness, sharpest memory access, steadiest concentration, and most balanced emotions throughout each day and night. As people move through their 60s and into their 70s, this timing mechanism becomes somewhat less flexible, which makes dependable daily signals all the more essential to keep everything coordinated smoothly. At the core of that mechanism sits a small cluster of specialized brain cells called the suprachiasmatic nucleus, which depends heavily on consistent cues, particularly the same wake-up time and bedtime every day, to maintain accurate alignment. Whenever bedtime fluctuates substantially, the brain finds it challenging to schedule and deliver complete periods of deep non-REM sleep, the stage that plays the leading role in taking short-term experiences and turning them into lasting, easily retrievable memories. A thorough investigation conducted by researchers at the University of Colorado followed 300 adults over the course of 8 years, and the results were striking and consistent. Individuals whose sleep timing lacked regularity showed roughly 30% faster loss in their ability to recall distinct life episodes. Things like what was said during a recent conversation, where a particular event took place, or details from a family gathering, even in cases where the total amount of sleep appeared sufficient. In other words, logging 7 or 8 hours in bed does not automatically provide full protection if the schedule keeps changing. The true restorative power of sleep depends on predictability. The brain operates at its best when it can rely on deep recovery arriving within roughly the same nightly window. If you recognize the frustration of walking into your living room and instantly forgetting why you headed there, or beginning to speak and having the rest of the sentence evaporate midway, feel free to type the word foggy in the comments. We're very likely talking about the same kind of experience that touches a great many others. A second pattern that appears frequently is remaining in bed while fully awake for extended stretches, 20 minutes, 40 minutes, sometimes a full hour or longer. The instinct feels reasonable. You're already comfortable. The covers are warm, the room is dark, so it seems logical to stay put and wait for sleep to arrive eventually. Yet the brain learns associations rapidly through repetition. Spending prolonged periods awake in that specific environment begins to teach it that bed equals thinking about tomorrow, replaying the day, feeling restless or worrying, rather than the automatic slide into peaceful unconsciousness. Over time, this learned connection weakens the bed's power as a reliable cue for rest, resulting in overall lighter sleep that breaks apart more often with numerous brief awakenings scattered through the hours. Picture your bed as a private, tranquil haven intended exclusively for sleep. When wakefulness lingers there, it gradually transforms into a space where mental activity continues instead of quieting. A detailed study carried out by Johns Hopkins University followed 250 adults aged 65 and older, and the data showed clearly that those who regularly stayed awake for long intervals in bed experienced 42% more nighttime awakenings and recorded significantly higher scores for morning anxiety. That subtle increase in edginess often appears as quicker irritation over minor inconveniences, greater difficulty staying absorbed in a favorite book or television show, or a general sense that mental steadiness has slipped, even for people who never previously dealt with noticeable worry or tension. Then there is the habit of retiring to bed surprisingly early, frequently at 7 or 8 in the evening, because it feels like the sensible choice for maximizing rest. The reasoning sounds solid on the surface. More time horizontal should translate to more recovery, yet the body generates the natural drive to sleep through a sufficient period of wakefulness and gentle activity during daylight hours. When bedtime arrives too soon after rising, that necessary buildup of sleep pressure remains incomplete, so even though someone spends 9 or 10 hours under the covers, the actual duration spent in the crucial slow wave and REM stages shortens considerably. Slow wave sleep carries out the essential task of flushing metabolic waste from brain tissue and firmly establishing factual knowledge and procedural skills in memory, while REM sleep supports the processing of emotions and contributes to flexible, creative thinking. Without adequate preceding wake time, neither phase reaches its full length or intensity. Researchers at the University of Michigan examined precisely this tendency among older adults and discovered that those who consistently went to bed early had REM periods approximately 20% shorter than expected, despite the extended total time spent in bed. The resulting pattern can closely resemble the early signs of cognitive difficulty: hesitation in finding ordinary words, noticeably slower mental processing, occasional lapses in orientation, but because the underlying driver is scheduling rather than irreversible structural change, correcting the timing often restores a meaningful portion of previous function. The brain retains its inherent capacity. What it requires is the appropriate framework to express that capacity fully. A fourth element that frequently surprises people is the presence of even modest amounts of light during nighttime hours. This might come from a hallway fixture kept on as a safety measure, the faint illumination of an alarm clock display, a brief glance at a smartphone screen when waking briefly, or light filtering under a door from a television or lamp in another part of the house. Even low levels of light communicate to the brain that full darkness has not yet arrived, which suppresses the release of melatonin, the hormone that promotes smooth sleep onset, sustains deeper stages once sleep begins, and simultaneously offers protective benefits to nerve cells against ordinary daily stress. Reduced melatonin leads to lighter, less consolidated sleep, slower clearance of brain waste, and diminished effectiveness in forming and strengthening memories. Stanford University investigators studied adults aged 65 and beyond and found that exposure to even dim nighttime light decreased melatonin production by about 50%, producing shallower rest and measurably poorer performance on memory-related tasks the following day. Most people tend to minimize this factor because no immediate obvious discomfort signals the problem. The decline develops slowly and steadily, making it natural to attribute the changes to aging itself rather than to an environmental influence that can be adjusted. The fifth habit worth careful consideration is long-term nightly reliance on sleep medications. For brief periods during unusually stressful times or while traveling, these can provide helpful support for some individuals, but when taken consistently every evening for 6 months or longer, particularly medications in the benzodiazepine class or similar, they commonly reduce the proportion of time spent in deep slow-wave sleep and REM sleep. Those specific stages represent the periods of most effective brain detoxification, memory reinforcement, and emotional recalibration. An important study published in JAMA Neurology examined older adults who used benzodiazepines nightly over extended durations and reported a 23% reduction in slow-wave sleep. This particular stage holds special importance because it facilitates the removal of proteins such as beta amyloid, which, if allowed to accumulate unchecked, contribute to progressive cognitive challenges. A person may feel they have slept adequately because they remained asleep for a solid block of hours, yet the brain has missed out on portions of its critical nightly repair agenda, leading to gradual effects on mental clarity, emotional steadiness, and reliable recall. The most heartening aspect of all this is that none of the patterns described inevitably produces permanent or irreversible consequences. Scientific understanding of brain function in later life highlights remarkable resilience, the ongoing ability to regain and sustain performance when conditions become more favorable. Even well into the 70s, 80s, and 90s, improvements in sleep support translate into meaningful, observable gains in daily mental life. The appropriate response is not fear or sweeping overhaul, but thoughtful awareness paired with small, considerate modifications that better align everyday routines with the body's natural preferences. To ground this in real human experience, allow me to share two accounts from people I have worked with directly. Margaret came to see me at age 72. She sat quietly, looking tired and a little guarded, and spoke in a soft voice that carried evident worry. "I honestly feel like my mind is slipping away," she said. She described standing in doorways, unable to recall what had brought her there, struggling during telephone conversations with her daughter to locate everyday vocabulary she had always used without effort, and noticing a new undercurrent of anxiety that left her feeling uncertain and unlike her usual self. She typically spent about 8 hours in bed, but bedtime varied considerably, sometimes around 9 o'clock, other nights closer to 11, and she frequently remained awake for nearly an hour once there, her thoughts circling through concerns about family members, her own health, or tasks awaiting the next day. Together, we introduced the REST protocol, a clear and structured yet entirely manageable set of steps I will describe fully in a moment. Margaret followed through with steady commitment. When she returned after 6 weeks, the difference in her presence was unmistakable. She reported morning alertness rising from roughly 40% to around 80% of what felt normal for her. Nighttime awakenings decreased from 4 or 5 occurrences to 1 or 2 at most. The creeping anxiety receded noticeably, replaced by a returning sense of self-assurance. While memory still experienced occasional minor stumbles, she described the overall sensation as one of relief. Her brain had finally received the restorative conditions it needed. During one follow-up, she looked directly at me and said, with a small, genuine smile, "I was certain this was permanent loss. It turns out my mind was simply exhausted because the nights hadn't been giving it proper support to recover." Harold, at 68, arrived proud of his disciplined approach. He made a point of going to bed at 7 o'clock every evening to guarantee plenty of rest. Unfortunately, the strategy produced the opposite effect. He regularly woke around 3 in the morning and found himself unable to return to sleep, lying there growing increasingly frustrated and tense. Testing of memory function revealed a mild but detectable reduction in his ability to retain new information over short intervals. For several years, he had relied on a low-dose sleep medication to help initiate rest. Our plan began with establishing an unchanging wake-up time regardless of how broken the previous night had been, then gradually shifted bedtime later while reducing evening light exposure and, in coordination with his physician, tapering the medication. Data from his sleep tracking device showed deep sleep increasing by 35% within 8 weeks. Repeated word recall assessments improved from 15 correct out of 20 to 19 out of 20. The persistent morning mental cloudiness lifted completely, and his mood remained noticeably more consistent from morning through evening. In a later conversation, Harold reflected that the protocol had effectively reset his natural sleep-wake cycle, finally allowing his brain to complete the restorative processes that had been consistently interrupted for years. Experiences like those of Margaret and Harold occur with encouraging regularity. Across the years, I have witnessed hundreds of older adults achieve similar, measurable progress: sharper cognitive function, more stable emotional responses, steadier daily energy. Once sleep patterns received deliberate, consistent attention. The framework that reliably delivers these outcomes is the one I refer to as rest, organized around four interconnected elements: rhythm through fixed timing, education concerning the cultivation of natural sleep pressure, stimulus control to reinforce the association between bed and sleep, and timing to identify the most suitable bedtime window. Rhythm begins with the decision to select one practical wake-up hour that suits your usual lifestyle, perhaps 7 o'clock, perhaps 7:30, and to rise at precisely that time every single morning, including weekends and following nights of poor rest. This unwavering daily marker powerfully reinforces the internal circadian clock, heightens the accumulation of sleep need as the hours pass, and encourages fuller engagement of deep restorative sleep once night returns. Research conducted at Harvard demonstrated that older adults who maintained consistent wake times experienced a 30% increase in deep sleep quantity within only 2 weeks. The initial mornings after inadequate sleep may feel difficult, yet the body typically adjusts quickly, rewarding the effort with progressively stronger and more dependable nights. Education in this context focuses on intentionally supporting the natural development of sleep pressure. Restrict daytime naps to a maximum of 20 minutes and ensure they conclude well before 3 o'clock in the afternoon so they do not diminish the drive for nighttime rest. Immediately upon waking, seek exposure to bright light for 15 to 20 minutes. Direct morning sunlight outdoors provides the most effective signal. When weather or season prevents that, position yourself near a bright therapeutic lamp or switch on multiple overhead fixtures indoors. Pair this light exposure with gentle physical activity, perhaps a slow walk around the garden or neighborhood, seated stretching exercises, or light household activities such as straightening the bed covers or preparing a simple breakfast. These combined elements sustain higher levels of daytime alertness, which in turn promotes deeper, more continuous nighttime sleep, granting the brain extended opportunity to carry out its essential maintenance. Stimulus control addresses periods of prolonged wakefulness in bed. The guideline is clear: if you have remained lying down for 20 to 30 minutes or longer without falling asleep, or after awakening during the night, rise calmly from bed. Maintain extremely low lighting, perhaps a small night light emitting a warm amber glow if movement requires it, and move to a different room or comfortable chair. Engage in an activity that is deliberately uninteresting and non-activating. Slowly turn the pages of an old catalog or magazine without reading intently. Fold a small pile of laundry methodically. Listen at low volume to soft instrumental music or nature recordings, or simply sit quietly practicing slow, even breathing. Importantly, avoid anything stimulating. No electronic screens, no news programs, no gripping novels, no mental list making or problem solving. Return to bed only when unmistakable sleepiness returns naturally. This practice systematically rebuilds the brain's recognition of bed as the designated place for sleep, while dissolving the link to wakeful frustration or mental busyness. Investigators at Johns Hopkins documented that seniors who applied stimulus control reduced their average number of nighttime awakenings by 42% over a period of 6 weeks, with many also reporting a calmer overall relationship with sleep difficulties. Timing centers on targeting an optimal bedtime interval for most older adults, typically falling between 9:30 and 10:30 at night. This range generally aligns well with the body's natural evening rise in melatonin production and provides sufficient total hours for several complete sleep cycles, ensuring adequate time in both deep slow wave and REM stages. Should your present bedtime lie considerably earlier or later, implement gradual shifts, moving the hour by approximately 15 minutes every 3 or 4 nights in the desired direction. Proceeding slowly helps prevent temporary rebound difficulties with falling asleep or excessive daytime tiredness. Findings from the University of Michigan indicated that seniors who adjusted toward this preferred timing window demonstrated 15 to 20% improvement on standardized cognitive performance measures after 4 weeks, largely attributable to lengthened deep and REM phases that supported stronger memory consolidation and more stable emotional regulation. To strengthen the effectiveness of these core components, actively minimize exposure to artificial light once evening arrives. Replace standard bulbs with low-wattage, warm-toned alternatives in lamps and hallways, cover or turn face down any devices with glowing displays, and establish a routine that avoids phones, tablets, or television screens during the final hour before bed. Safeguarding melatonin levels facilitates smoother sleep initiation and enables more thorough execution of the brain's protective and reparative functions overnight. Should any medications, whether intended for sleep or prescribed for other purposes, appear to influence rest quality, discuss the matter openly with your prescribing physician to explore whether minor modifications might better complement natural sleep processes.